To that breaking news overnight, a massive 8.2 earthquake shaking the coast of Alaska. Ginger Z is tracking the latest. Hey, Ginger.
A 7.0 magnitude earthquake hit Anchorage, Alaska on Friday. The tremor caused buildings to shake and roads to collapse. Several aftershocks shook the area Saturday morning, and despite the damage, there are no reported deaths.
Alaska is known for its frequent earthquakes, making up 11% of all the earthquakes in the world. Shockingly, 3 out of the top 8 largest earthquakes in the world have occurred in Alaska, with an average of 1,000 earthquakes per month. This state has earned the title of being the most earthquake-prone in the U.S. 7 out of the 10 biggest earthquakes ever recorded in the U.S. also happened in Alaska, making it the most timid state in the country. It's no wonder that the ground is always shaking in Alaska. Join us as we look into these strange Alaska earthquakes that gave everybody a shock. Earthquakes in Alaska. Alaska has grown so quake-proof that magnitude 6 earthquakes are no longer considered enormous. Residents there have their properties earthquake-proven through the implementation of special architectural tactics that allow their buildings to withstand deep earth tremors, and emergency escape procedures are learned, so the damages caused by earthquakes are significantly minimized. Because of these established measures, they merely rearrange and repair following earthquakes. To be a big deal in the U.S., earthquakes have to possess a minimum magnitude of 7. Some of these violent earthquakes are listed below. 2021 Chignik earthquake. This earthquake, ranked 7th on the list of the most violent earthquakes to ever occur in the United States, happened on Chignik Island on July 28, 2021, with a magnitude of 8.2. Following this tremor, a few moments later, there were 3 more earthquakes. According to the United States Geographical Survey, the 3 subsequent earthquakes were mere aftershocks of the preceding 8.2 magnitude earthquake. Nonetheless, these aftershocks had magnitudes of 5.9, 6.1, and 6.9. Fortunately and surprisingly, no lives were lost during this natural disaster. The sparse population of Alaska deserves the credit for that. Moreover, the earthquake occurred offshore, making its impact less land damaged. When the earthquake started, a tsunami warning was dispatched by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. However, thankfully, it was soon revoked because the quake was far below the sea floor with a depth of 32 kilometers, which significantly lowered the chances of a tsunami occurrence. A tsunami might have been likely if the earthquake hadn't been that deep into the sea floor. 2020 Simeonof earthquake. This rather unusual earthquake occurred on July 21, 2020, with a magnitude of 7.8 in the Shumagan Gap. The quake was unusual because scientists always considered the area unlikely to rupture. Despite the frequency of earthquakes in Alaska, before 2020, the area had not experienced any earthquakes for at least 100 years. So when an earthquake came, several people were in disbelief. In addition, most gaps had a waiting period of 50 to 90 years. So experts believe that when the Shumagan exceeded the 90-year limit, the 125-mile-wide gap started slipping gently instead of accumulating stress. A series of aftershocks followed the earthquake, although it did not generate tsunamis. Days after this earthquake, this series of aftershocks, with magnitudes up to 6.1, continued. Moreover, the aftershocks were as frequent as 100 times a day. There was little damage because the Shumagan area in the Aleutian Islands is sparsely inhabited. Eventually, the earthquake summoned a miniature tsunami, which led to floods and damage to properties. Thankfully, no lives were lost. 1965 Rat Islands earthquake. On February 4, 1965, barely a year after the greatest earthquake ever recorded in Alaska, another tremor hit the Rat Islands with a magnitude of 8.7, evoking a tsunami that was 10.7 meters in height. Oddly similar to the previous years, The earthquake started deep below and then moved southwards, then westwards, before rupturing along the Aleutian Arc. When the Pacific tectonic plate moved under the North American plate, the megathrust earthquake started in the western region of the Aleutian Islands. It turns. Despite the severity of this earthquake, there were no fatalities. There were damages, however, as properties worth $10,000 suffered spoilage. It turns out the preparations of Alaskans against earthquakes exceed only special architectural tactics. The 1964 Great Earthquake of Alaska. The most violent earthquake ever recorded in the United States, also called the Good Friday earthquake, happened on March 27, 1964, with an enormous magnitude of 9.2. After 4 minutes and 36 seconds, 131 locals were lost to this disaster. Accompanying the earthquake was a tsunami that claimed 23 lives. Fortunately, 45 people had a chance of escaping the wave. Furthermore, an underwater landslide in Prince William Sound, Port Valdez, was incited by this earthquake. After the damage to the harbor by the landslide, 32 people, some aboard a ship and others working on the docks, drowned. The only earthquake that exceeded the violence of the Great Alaska Earthquake of 1964 was the earthquake that occurred in Chile in 1960 with a magnitude of 9.5. The most damage was recorded in Nick Arm, between Point Woronzof and Fish Creek. Surprisingly, the earthquake itself didn't bring about many fatalities, as only 9 people passed away due to the earthquake. On the other hand, the tsunami, carrying with it great force, wiped out 122 lives. 1957, Andreanof Island. The North American and Pacific tectonic plates had been at it for much longer before the 1965 earthquake. This earthquake, with another whooping magnitude of 8.7, occurred on March 9, 1957, and also had a similar trigger to the 1965 Rat Islands earthquake. But this time, it was the North American tectonic plates that crashed into the Pacific plate. A subduction zone about 4,000 kilometers deep exists at the boundaries of these tectonic plates. This trench is known as the Aleutian subduction zone. Alaskans remained dignified as no lives were lost again, but several properties survived destruction. Unfortunately, sufficient information about this earthquake was not recorded. Causes of earthquakes in Alaska. On average, every 1 to 2 years, an earthquake with a magnitude of 7 and above occurs in Alaska, and every 13 years, an earthquake with a magnitude of 8 or more happens. Earthquakes build the landscapes that drive Alaska's rivers, glaciers, and climate zones, from the dramatic southeast coast to the heights of the Alaska Range and the volcanic islands of the Aleutian. The movement of tectonic plates can be highlighted in most of these and all major earthquakes. One of the many tectonic plates that constitute the Earth's crust is the landmass beneath the Pacific Ocean. Annually, the Pacific plate moves closer to Alaska by some inches, and Alaska is considered part of the North American plate. Where these two plates meet, the dense oceanic rocks of the Pacific thrust beneath the more buoyant continental rocks of Alaska. This process is known as subduction. The descent of the Pacific plate down to 200 kilometers or more generates subduction zone earthquakes. The shallow part of the subduction zone, where the crust of the Pacific plate sticks and slips past the overlying crust, is the point of occurrence of Alaska's largest earthquakes, with magnitudes as high as 8 and 9. The movement of the Pacific plate also drives the tectonics in southeast Alaska differently, though. The plate grinds past southeast Alaska and British Columbia as it moves inches towards the northwest. Unlike the subduction zone, these faults slip primarily in a side-to-side motion, with a different tectonic plate on each side. The earthquakes caused by this movement occur primarily in the Earth's crust, which is usually shallow. This well-developed fault system has been active for tens of millions of years, and it has historically hosted several earthquakes with magnitudes close to 8. Meanwhile, the land is compressed in a north-south direction, and southern Alaska is sheared or tugged to the west when this northwest motion of the Pacific Plate exerts tremendous force on Alaska. This compression and shearing are accommodated by numerous fault systems that cross-cut the Alaska mainland. Despite the fact that the vigor of these faults decreases toward the north, the impact of this compression can be traced into the Arctic Ocean. The resulting seismicity has a remarkable variety and geographic reach. Instances of earthquakes that resulted from this powerful compressional force are the 2002 Denali Fault earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.9, and the 1958 Huslia earthquake, which had a magnitude of 7.3. The highly active Minto Flat seismic zone can also be traced to this powerful compressional force. Earthquake swarms, or earthquakes that are not like the typical main shock-aftershock sequence, can also happen in Alaska. These swarms occur around the state and vary in magnitude, quantity, and duration. However, the cause or reason behind these swarms remains unknown. A swarm with magnitudes ranging from 5.3 to 5.7 happened in 2014 near Noatak and rattled residents, and the earthquake spread out over 2 months. The following year, 2015, the normally quiet Pribilofe was shaken by a swarm off St. George Island. 3 years later, another swarm in the eastern Brooks Range made up over 2,000 of Alaska's recorded 55,000 earthquakes that occurred in 2018. Can these earthquakes be avoided? Although all Alaskans live with earthquake hazards, the Alaska Earthquake Center aims to limit the risks by creating awareness of the places hosting earthquakes and the reasons behind their occurrence. Clues about potential earthquakes are provided by tracking daily earthquakes. Rapid reporting allows the public and emergency managers to examine the potential impacts of earthquakes. When the shakings across the region and in buildings are measured, potential impacts are assessed, and the organization determines the most effective type of emergency response. The organization's knowledge of earthquake hazards and its commitment to limiting hazards for all Alaskans are demonstrated in the width of its network, with monitoring stations situated in cities, villages, and critical infrastructure from the southeast to the Bering Strait. Earthquakes near volcanoes. Surprisingly, the earthquakes that happen near volcanoes are not very felt, and they are less damaging. Nonetheless, they tend to occur in very large numbers. Also, earthquakes can infer changes in or around the volcano. These changes may be due to the movement of gas or magma, may be a result of moving ice or debris, or may just reflect the adjustment of stresses in the neighboring region. Seismographs, with peculiar signatures that can often be used to examine the cause of the earthquake, are produced by each source. Forthcoming eruptions can occasionally be indicated by the presence of certain types of earthquakes or numerous earthquakes accompanied by other indicators. Most active volcanoes are found in subduction zones, and these subduction zones generate high rates of earthquakes that are not volcanic. These earthquakes often warrant more detailed analysis, although only a small proportion of Alaska's earthquakes are caused by volcanic activity. A tailored workflow is required to identify and characterize earthquakes associated with volcanic processes. Hence, the Alaska Earthquake Center partners with the Alaska Volcano Observatory to track all notable seismic activity in the state. Therefore, large earthquakes and their societal impacts are addressed by the Earthquake Center, while the Volcano Observatory addresses smaller earthquakes that can occur in large numbers near volcanoes. Seismic data, one of many tools used in monitoring volcanoes, is combined with other observations such as geology, satellite imagery, ground deformation, and local observations by the Volcano Observatory to examine volcano hazards. Earthquakes are not child's play, and the residents of Alaska finding their way around them does not indicate that the aftermath of earthquakes is non-existent. Putting up with natural disasters takes a lot of courage and resilience. Kudos to Alaskans for employing mechanisms to mitigate earthquake effects. The causes of the Alaskan earthquakes is a wonderfully in-depth study. It makes one feel more aware of one's cosmos. While Alaskans are being commended for their resilience, you could flaunt your advanced knowledge on natural disasters. Our team has released the new Cosmos Tough Phone Case. This phone case, as tough as the Alaskan Special Architectural Tactics, is reliably durable. Do not allow the opportunity to get this phone case pass you by. To place an order, simply click on the link in the description. Thank you for watching. For more mind-blowing videos, kindly like and subscribe to our channel.